In the previous tutorials, we have discussed what I call the three big methods for arrays: filter, map, and reduce. I'll include a link to each of those in the description of this tutorial. In this tutorial, we are going to take a look at the every and sum methods. These two methods are great for checking every element in an array using a function that you pass in. Welcome to another tutorial from All Things JavaScript, where we help bridge the gap between novice and expert. Now, every and sum may not find a use case each and every day of your coding, but when the functionality is needed, they are invaluable. So let me paint this scenario. You have an array, and you want to make sure every element matches a certain bit of criteria, or you want to find out if some of the elements match that criteria. In that case, every or sum should be used. Like the other array methods we have talked about, every and sum are higher order functions, which means that we pass a function into the method, and that function is used to test each element in the array. Now, every and sum are also predicate functions, which means they return either true or false. So that is all you get as a result of using one of those methods, is a true or a false. Now, in the case of every, it checks each element in the array and returns true only if each element in the array meets that criteria. Now, in the case of sum, it checks each element and it will return true if at least one element meets that criteria. So to better understand this, let's look at some examples. So let me jump to Sublime. All right, now I'm going to start out with a simple example. I have a simple array here with just 5 numbers in it. And the first thing we're going to use is every. So I'm going to put what every returns into the result variable. Remember, it will return either true or false. And so this is going to allow me to see the result of what I'm checking here. So I enter the array and then every, and then we need to pass in a function. And this function that we pass in, the first parameter is the value of each element in the array. So it's going to cycle through this array. First, it will return 1, and that will be placed in the val variable, then 2 and 3 and so on. So it's going to cycle through those elements in the array. And it's going to allow us to test each element against this criteria, the criteria we put in our function. So let's go ahead and look at what that would be. So we're going to have it return, we need to have it return a result. And that will allow the every function to determine whether it returns a true or a false. So we're going to return whether this value meets some conditional. We're going to check to see if the value is less than 10. Now, if the value is less than 10, it will return true. If every single one of these returns true, then every will return true as well. However, if it encounters any one of them that returns false, then every will return false. Now, as soon as every encounters a value that returns false, it stops looking. So if it got to the second element and that returned false, it wouldn't look at the third, fourth, and fifth element. It would stop at that point because it knows that it needs to return false. Now let's go ahead and put a console log statement just to see what we're getting. And then we'll take a look at this. Save it. Refresh, open the console, and we get true. So basically what that is telling us is that every value within that array is less than 10. All right, now let's adjust that a bit. Let's go less than 4. Now what's going to happen here? So it will pass in the first element, that will return true. Second element will return true. Third element will return true. The fourth element is false. So it returns false at that time. Every stops. It doesn't look at this last element. Every stops and returns a false at that point. So let's take a look at that. Refresh, and there we get a false. Now, what if we change this, instead of every, we used sum? So this simply checks to see if some of these are less than 4. It will look at the first one. Is it less than 4? It is, so it's going to return true. It'll stop at that point, and some will cause a true value to be returned, indicating that there is at least one element in this array that is less than 4. So it won't even have to look at the other elements. So let's go ahead and try that one out. Refresh, and sure enough, we get a true. Now let me show you a nice application of the sum method. And this is a great application to use if you are working on an array and you want to make sure that everything in that array is a number. So this is what we would do. We're going to change this part of it right here, and we're going to use isNaN to determine if the value is not a number. Now let's see what that returns just by itself. We refresh. Now it returns false. Now why did it return false? Well, because everything is a number, and it's looking for something that's not a number. So if anything in this array is not a number, it will return true. And that can be a great way to check an array that you need to do some sort of numeric processing on. Check to make sure that everything's a number before you start processing it. Now let's see what would happen if we put something in here that was not a number. Save that. Refresh. And sure enough, we get the opposite. We get true. There is something in there that's not a number. Now, how can you be sure that things are functioning like I said with sum? Well, let me just modify things just a little bit. We're going to still check to see if something is less than 4. But I'm going to assign it to a variable this time. And then we're going to log it to the console so we can see what I represents. And then we will simply return I. Okay, let's see what we get now. You can see how sum will only check a certain number of values. So we get one true displaying on line 7. Here's line 7, this console log statement here. We get a true for this one, and then we get this true because it encountered that we have a true value here, and so that's all sum needs. It stops looking at all of the other elements, and it returns a true at that point. Okay, so quick way to see that that's the way sum is working. Now let me do one more example, and let me explain this example. Let me add some code here. So I've got two variables. Now let's say this is an example that I've used in some work previous to this when I've been doing some testing online. And I had some fill-in-the-blank answers where the student had to enter the exact phrase in order to get it correct. And so this is the correct answer. I believe this is a Tolstoy quote. And so this is the correct answer here. And let's assume that this variable contained an answer that was entered by the student. This is what they entered. So how do we verify that it's exactly the same? Well, an obvious way would be to check simply to see if these two variables are equal to each other. But what if there's other stuff in there? What if there's commas or uppercase is different or something like that? Something that you need to deal with that may make that simple solution not as simple as possible. What I found works is I convert each of the answers to an array. And each word will be one element in the array. And then I cycle through the array using every and check to make sure each word matches up. And as I do that, I can modify the word. I can convert it to both to lowercase. I can remove any punctuation if I need to, so I can verify whether it's correct or not. Let me just show you how I would do that. So I'm going to set up a function to take care of this for me. I'm going to call it check match. And this function is going to have two things passed in, the response and the correct response. And those will be arrays. And then I'm going to return the correct response using every, and I'm going to pass in a function. And that function is going to grab the word as it cycles through each of those words that will be in an array, and will also grab the index of those. Okay? And then here's what we're going to do in the body. We're going to return word.toLowerCase. Now I'm going to keep this simple. What I've done when I've used this in the work I've done is not only did I convert it to lowercase, but I would use regular expression to remove any other characters that I may not want in there. Any other characters other than a word character. And then I check to see if that is equal to the response, and I use the index to check which word I need to look at. I convert that to lowercase, and as I mentioned before, I'll also use a regular expression to remove any other characters. And so this will allow me to check it word by word to see if the answer is correct. So let's see what we get here. I'm going to call check match, and I'm going to pass in the answer. I'm going to split it to turn it into an array, and then I'm also going to pass in the correct answer and split that to turn it into an array. That will give me the results. Then I'll just move this down here so we can see what the results are. All right, let's take a look at that. If I refresh, I get true. So those two statements are correct. What if I had a word in here? Let's see what we get then. Then we get false. Now, as I mentioned, this is a simple representation of the function I create. I want to account for other things that could be typed in that the learner could add that may not make it incorrect. For example, let's say they add an exclamation point at the end. Well, the statement is still correct, but the exclamation point would cause it to be incorrect. But by using every and converting these to arrays, I'm able to cycle through and check each word and therefore make sure it's correct that way. So that's an application I've used in the past with those. So every and some. Once again, not something you're going to use frequently in your coding, but are invaluable when you do need them. Now, before we are done here, please hit the like button. It can help others on YouTube find the tutorial. Also hit the bell button to be notified about new tutorials. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button. Or click the circle link on the left, the one with my face. I release a new tutorial each week. You can click the video link in the center to access another tutorial right away, or click the link on the right to visit my website, allthingsjavascript.com, for full courses and a complete list of tutorials. Thanks for watching.